Hey guys, welcome to this week's video. Today we're going to have a look at changing from an FPS to a third person shooter. So we're going to go from first person view to third person view. But I'm going to keep it as basic as possible. Unfortunately I don't have that much time this week, so I'm going to build a very basic system, and then maybe next week or in a following video I'll look at making it a little bit smoother. But with that being said, let's just jump straight into it. So the project that I'm going to use as a foundation here is one of the projects from my previous video, how to set up a third person template. I'll put a card up in the right hand corner now so you can watch that. But essentially what we did in that video, we got a first person template. We dragged in the animation starter pack assets from the marketplace, which are free. And then from that, what we did is we created a child actor of the example actor within inside the animation pack. Down here we've got UE4 ASP character. We made a child of that and called it player B. Within that, what we did is we copied all of the first person shooter, let's have a look, all the first person shooter projectile sort of blueprint. We copied that over to our third person. We set up this character model, put a gun in his hand, and we adjusted the crosshair. So essentially, as a starting place, if you watch the video, you're going to have this. Wow, that's really loud. But you're going to have this this template here that you can see. So you've got a character which run, jump, and fire, and that's what we're going to build on top. So if we have a look at this at the moment, we've got the camera slightly behind our character. Now, for a first-person shooter, you're going to have the camera set up slightly different. Your camera is actually going to be your body in a way. So if you look at the first-person character, which just to clarify, we've got a third person because we've created that, and we've set this up in a first-person template. You will need a third-person character to do this, so it's almost like a must that you go and watch the previous video. And to find that, you go into your first-person BP and open that up. So if you look at that, as you're probably familiar with, it's a camera with a set of arms and a gun sticking out, and that's pretty much it. So we need to replicate this part on our third-person character. So simplest way to do that is where our camera is connected to our boon. I'm literally just going to put arms and a gun here, and then we'll make this invisible and make this visible instead. So what we're going to do is with the player camera selected in player B, just for clarification, we're going to add component, we're going to add a skeletal mesh, and we're going to put this as arms. And my caps lock is on, so let's just fix that before we carry on. Rename arms. Okay, and then on the right hand side under skeletal mesh, we're going to select none, and we're going to pick from the list mannequin arms, and you'll notice that they're sort of floating in nowhere land at the moment. And then before we move on, let's just change the animation anim class to first person anim BP, and there you can see that he's expecting to hold a gun. And then before we correct any position, let's just add another component to the arms, and that's going to be another skeletal mesh, and let's just call this gun. And same again on the right hand side, skeletal mesh, we're going to select none, but this time we're going to pick FP gun. And again, that's pointing in the wrong direction, but we'll fix that in just a second. So for the arms first, what we're going to do is, because we want this to be almost identical to the FPS, we're going to use the FPS character's information to our benefit. This is very similar to how we set up this third person in the first place. We're just going to essentially steal a lot of the data already built in the first person project and just transfer it over to the other. So in the first person character, select the mesh 2P, which is the set of arms, and we've got this transform data over here on the right. So we've got location, rotation and scale. So we want to copy the location, head over to player B, make sure you've got arms selected, and where it says location, right click and paste, and that'll copy in the same location as the first person. And then same again for the rotation. Let's hit copy. Let's go over to player B, and with the arm selected, we're going to paste on rotation, and that's put that in there. Now for the gun, we're going to do actually for the gun, this is going to be a little bit different. The gun is actually welded or mounted to the hand using this construction script here. So at some point we're gonna wanna call that. So what we can effectively do is just select this construction script, Control and C, head over to player B. Let's hit construction script again, paste. Let's just move it over to make it neat. Let's link these two up. And we just need to change these two references. So we don't have an FP gun or a mesh 2P. So let's delete those. So the target is the gun. So let's just drag our gun straight over. Target. Let's move that down. And then for parent, we're going to grab our arms from the right, plug it into parent, and then everything else should be the same. Back over to the, let's go to the viewport. Let's have a look at that. So now what you can see is, as you'd expect, you've got a set of arms and a gun. Just for the thrill of it, let's just press play and see what happens now. So now we've actually got FPS and TPS all in the same one, but we've got the weapon firing from the other guy. So now we just need to set up the blueprint to sort of make the difference between the two, or switch between the two, should I say. So what we're going to do is just right click. Now I'm going to hard code this in. I'm just going to type in V key, and we'll get a V key pressed. So I've picked V for viewport or view. But what you could do to hard code this in is you could go to edit and project settings. I'll tell you what, I'll do it anyway because I may as well now. Go to action mapping and press plus on the mapping, and let's pick an appropriate name. Let's go to change view, and what key do we want? We want the keyboard, and we want the V key. There we go, V. Let's go back over to our player B character now. Let's get rid of that and let's put change view. So now we've got our change view input section now. So when we change the view, we're going to want to change from being in third person to being in first person. So we're going to need some way of setting yes or no, which one are we in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a variable over on the right hand side, and I'm just going to say FPS question mark, like are we in FPS? And I'm going to drag that over and I'm going to set it. So I think by default we should have it in third person, which means when we press change view, we're going to want to change it to FPS. So are we in FPS? Yes. Let's copy this. So you can select that one and press Control W, and that's duplicate. But because we're setting it here, when we press the button again, we want to unset it. Now, if we want to do like a toggle, so let's say you press the button and you want it on, and then you press the button again and you want it off. There's a brilliant function called flip flop. So if you type in flip, you should get here flow control flip flop. Now essentially what this does is it takes one input in and then it'll switch between the two. So if I press the V key or the change view button, it's going to go to A and change it to an FPS. And then when I press the button again, it's going to flip over to B, and it's going to set it to not FPS. So with these states being set up, we can then go on and change our scene or our character to look differently, and then we can use these booleans later on to change like where our gun shoots from, whether it shoots from the third person gun or the first person gun, but we'll deal with that in just a minute. So when we press this button, So to start with, we don't want these arms and this gun to appear right in front of our camera because it's a third-person game. So let's select our arms, and on the right-hand side, if you scroll down, and you'll eventually find rendering. So here, rendering, visible is ticked. So if we untick that, and then same again, select the gun, scroll down until you see rendering, or scroll up, depending. Visible, untick. Let's hit compile and play, and now we've got our third person as we had before, with no gun and arms. But when we set it to FPS, we actually want to make these visible, but we also want to make the other character not visible. So we want to change the third person mesh and weapon to not visible first. So to do that, if you want to grab a reference to your mesh, which is the top one, grab a reference, and from that, if you pull off and type in set viz, you'll have a rendering function called set visibility, and this is the same as just going into the menu and ticking whether it's visible or not, but we're going to do it in the blueprint. So we want to drag into this, and we just need to really replicate this for everything. So if it's FPS, new visibility is false, not ticked. So we want to set it to invisible, essentially. Let's grab our weapon reference, and we want to set viz to not visible. Let's drag this in. Okay, now because we've set first person to true, we want to now grab our first person arms reference and come off that and set visibility. But this time we want to tick it. We want the visibility to be true now. And then same for the gun. Let's just drag the gun reference just up there. And we want to set viz. Let's link that up and let's tick it true. So now when we change this, we're going to turn our third person character's gun and body off, and we want to set the first person arms and weapon to true, so we can see them. Now obviously we can't switch that back just yet, but let's get that sorted. So we're going to do the same thing but in the reverse order and the reverse true or false. So easiest way is probably to highlight the last sort of 4 nodes, hit Control and W on the keyboard, and that's going to duplicate. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to link these up. But this time, because we're then going to a third person, we want to turn the visibility off for both the arms and the gun. And then if we can try and just grab... so I've grabbed these 2 nodes, and I'm going to hit Control on my keyboard and just click the weapon and the mesh, and that's going to select them 2 as well. I'm going to hit Control and W again, drag these over to the right, just neaten that one up a little bit, but this time we're going to set these to visible. So what we've done here is we've gone, we're already in third person mode, we've hit our change view. This is going to go down here. We're going to set that we're in first person mode. We're going to disable the third person body and gun, and then we're going to enable the first person arms and gun. And then if we press it again, the opposite's going to happen. We're going to disable our first person character, and we're going to enable our third person character. Now let's hit compile and see if that works. So we're currently in third person. We're going to hit V, and now we're in first person. In first person mode. We hit V again, we're back in third person. Now in a follow-up video I will make that transition smoother, because if you hit V you notice the character just disappears and then just pops back into the scene. I'll work on making a nice a smoother way of doing that, almost like a blend, but for now that'll do. Now, one other thing, obviously, if we fire now, our crosshair is absolutely fine. If we hit V and fire, our bullet is still coming from like the middle of nowhere where our third person character was. So we need to change that. So because we've set this boolean to true or false if we're in FPS, if you're familiar with the spawn projectile, we're actually getting a world location of where our barrel is, and our barrel is actually dictated by this sphere, because we've actually put the sphere in the end of the gun. And if you can see, well, you can't see because it's not visible, but if we go and set the visibility of the gun to visible for a second, we've not put a sphere in the end of this one yet, so we need to do that. So with your gun selected, add another component, type in sphere or SP, that's probably enough, and sphere collision. Let's add one of those. So at the moment it's just in the middle of the gun, but again, if we go back to our first person character and we go to the viewport, I mean, I guess we don't need to go to the viewport, but where it says FP gun on the left, go to the sphere, and we're going to do the same as we've done with all the other stuff. We're just going to copy the location to this sphere. So let's scroll back to the top, paste the location, so that's at the end of my barrel. I'm going to go back to the FPS, get the rotation, I'm going to paste that, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to get the scale lastly. Paste that in. Now everything looks as I'd expect it to. And then just so I don't mess anything up, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the gun and I'm going to find that rendering and set it to invisible again. And then I'm going to hit back to the event graph. And because we've got a reference for our third person sphere, we should probably name these more appropriate, but you should set this to like FPS sphere. Let's do that. So caps lock FPS sphere. Yeah, see, I knew I'd mess it up. Come on. Sphere, SPS sphere. Okay, so that just makes it a bit easier to figure out. So how are we gonna switch between the two? So because we've got a boolean that says are we in FPS or not, there's actually a node called select. Now select it takes in what's like a wild card, but it can take in a boolean. So whether you're true or false, this is the answer I want you to give. So our FPS is down here in our variables as a true or false, so we can drag that out and we can pop that now onto the index pin. And essentially, if it's true, are we in FPS, we're going to want to use the FPS sphere, and if it's false, that means we're in third person, we're going to want to go for the other sphere. So what we can do is we can just literally pin these in to do exactly that. So if we drag that over and drag that here, what we've got now is, are you in FPS? Yes. Okay, we'll use the FPS sphere instead. So now, with that being said, let's compile and press play, and you'll notice if I fire now, it comes from the third person gun, and if I hit V, it now comes from the end of my gun. The only thing is now, the crosshair doesn't really match up. Now again, I'm going to make a bit of a weird adjustment. Actually, sorry, I should have explained that. Essentially what I'm doing now is I'm going to the content folder, going to the first person blueprint, and then the first person HUD. Now, the crosshair on the screen is actually drawn on as a texture. So it's here, draw texture. So what it does, it receives a draw HUD, it gets the size of the screen, divides it in two, so that'd be the center. And then because of our third person character sort of like off center, we need to put this offset to align the crosshair with where the projectile is going to go, and then that draws onto the screen with the draw texture. So we actually need to further offset this depending on what view type we've got. So we are going to be using a select again. So we're going to want a select, and depending whether we have got the FPS true or false, so select the boolean. We actually need to get this reference now, but if we drag off here and type in FPS, there isn't an FPS because we're not in the player anymore. We're in the HUD. We don't have that variable set up anymore. So what we actually need to do is get the player character. Where is it? There it is. We need to get a reference to our character, and then we need to actually cast to our character, which is player B, caster player B. And now as player B, we can get a reference to this FPS. So as player B, use this FPS target. So now we've got exactly the same thing as earlier. Can you tell me if we're an FPS or not? If we are, let's do this, and if we're not, let's do this. Now this cast node requires an execute to work, so we need to drag that over and just pop that in here, and then we can pop that over there like that. Now I'm not going to worry a great deal about how this looks because I am running out of time. However, I don't want it to look a complete mess. So these are the two offset figures. So we've got our Y figure and here's our X figure. So we need to make some subtle adjustments. Now, because this is two different figures, we're actually going to need two of these selects. So I'm going to select the select. I'm going to press Control and W, and I'm going to have two of them. And then they're both going to rely off the same FPS index. And these return values are going to ultimately feed these two nodes here. So, oh, let's get rid of that. I don't want that pin. Remove pin. So this was the Y, and if we are in TPS, so if this is false, we want this to be 50 like it was before. And the same again for this one. We want this one to be 20, just as it was before. Now, for first person, if it's true, for the X, which is the center of the screen, is left and right, I actually want that to be 0. I want it to be slap bang in the middle, and that should be about right. Now, for the Y, for the height, I believe this is going to be 20. From what I remember in my testing. So what we've got here is cast to our player, check if we're in FPS mode or third person mode, and then set the offsets of the HUD appropriately. So if we hit compile now, hopefully that I've done that correctly. We've got this third person mode with a crosshair which is somewhat right, and then when we hit V, you can see the crosshair move there. And actually, that crosshair is a little bit too high. So, what have we got? Divide, blah blah blah. Let us set that to 10, and let's see where that goes. Should go over. Okay, that's too much. Let's go 30. Change it over, and there we go. We've got FPS and TPS. Now you will notice that in the first person we have got that little capsule collider next to us. So what we're actually doing now, we're actually walking into stuff with that capsule collider. I guess we need to move that over, don't we? Okay, so the easiest way to do that is actually if we go to the player B blueprint. Now, as you can see, the camera is all the way over here, which means our arms, although they're invisible, let's set them to visible just so we can understand this a bit more. Because our arms are connected to the camera, wherever the camera goes, the arms go. So if we can somehow just get the camera to be forward, where the other character would be, then the capture will be absolutely correct. So what we can do is let's just undo that and undo it again so that they're invisible. The camera boom. Now, the camera boom, the anchor point is actually in the center of our capsule, and we're telling the boom to be a set distance away from its anchor, which you can see represented by this red line. Now, that red line is actually the arm length. Now, you can see as I adjust this, okay, maybe I can't just slide adjust it. That went a bit weird, sorry. As I adjust this, let's set it to 150. I'm actually making the camera come closer and closer. So if I set this to 0, I reckon that is going to be in the right place for us to have the capsule. So what I'm going to do is in the event graph, when we set our view to be FPS true, let's grab our camera boom and let's do our set arm length to 0. And then let's copy this, drag that down, and let's then set it back to 300 as it was before. So here we are, press V, boom, FPS, TPS. Now, like I said before, I'll work on smoothing that out, but for the time being, I think you've got a nice neat little switcheroo there. I've run out of time, and we're done anyway, so thank you for watching. Appreciate the view to the end. If you like this, consider giving me a thumbs up, consider subscribing because there'll be plenty more to come, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video.